Kia ora, my name is Logan and I'm a Kiwi dad. When I first became a dad, I realised quite quickly that I did not want my wife to go back to work full time, and she didn't either. So we had about 6 months of maternity leave to try and figure out our finances. So I started really budgeting for the first time, comparing different prices for different services like power, internet, insurance, and just looking at what we could cut. From there I made a little guide and I posted it onto Reddit on just different ways you could save some money, and that just sort of blew up, over 100,000 downloads and views, which then led to a Stuff article and a Herald article and being on the breakfast show sharing these tips. From there, people have since asked me what the number one tip, if I only had one, would be to save some money. And that tip is, drumroll please, to budget. Now I know you've probably heard that before. I personally tried to budget in the past using different apps. I had a little book once where I was trying to jot it all down. I've kept all my receipts before. It never really lasted. So what I ended up doing was spending some time with a friend that had a budget, simplifying it as much as possible, and now I have this great little budget doc, but I've had a few people message me asking me how to use it. So I've realised that what works for me might not work for others, but hopefully this does help you. If you set a budget, I guarantee you are going to save more money than you've ever saved before, because you're going to be aware of your money for possibly, in my case, the first time in my life. The best part of a budget is that you become aware of your spending habits. So one, you learn all your expenses you have to pay, but two, you find out that, hey, every Friday I tend to get takeaways. That's interesting. Or that when I go to the supermarket at night time, I buy more than I need to. I spend a lot extra. So these are all things that you learn from doing a budget. So let's get into how to budget. On the KiwiDad Instagram, just head to this link tree, click that, and it'll take you over to this little download. Click the cost of living guide and budget template. Once you've clicked onto that, just open up this budget and make a copy, and away you go. So we've now opened up our budget, and you'll see all of this and think, whoa, that's a lot. I don't want to do that. Don't worry, we're going to break it down into individual steps. Okay, so right off the bat, we're going to look at the period in which you distribute your income. So I get paid weekly, so I've set mine to weekly, but if you just click this little drop down here, you can also set it to fortnightly or monthly. Okay, so before we can do any budget, we need to know how much we have to work with, right? So we need to work out what our total incoming is. And I'm just going to use made up rounded numbers here, just so it's a bit easier to follow. Let's say my main income brings in, let's go for gold, say $1,000 a week after tax. I wish. Then we're going to make a second income, and we're going to call that $600. So if you're in a relationship, maybe your partner works, maybe they don't, just chucking it in. And then let's say accommodation supplement, working for families, we'll call that $150. And just so we have a nice rounded number, we'll say any other income sources you might have. I don't know, maybe there's some shares building up. Maybe, I don't know, you do some babysitting, whatever. We'll put in 50 there. We've worked out now that weekly, this fictitious person, who I wish I was, makes $1,800 a week. We're going to go up to the top here and we're going to put in 1,800. It's the only one that's not automated. Perfect. Now we're going to go over to, so this is our weekly obligations. So this is all things that we have to pay, that we can't not pay. Right off the bat, we've got mortgage or rent. So if you have a mortgage, you're probably fixed for at least a year. Maybe you've got 6 months left. Maybe you've got the entire year left. You can have a rough idea of the amount you're paying every single week. If you're rent, then provided your landlord doesn't do a huge increase, then you're also going to have a rough idea. Chuck that one in right there. For this example, we're going to say $800. This next one you see, all bills, is the only complicated part of this budget, and this is the one that's going to take a few minutes to work out. So we want to figure out every expense that we have to pay. So this is things like power, internet. If you have, say, a hire purchase or credit card payment that you have to make, then that would go in here as well. Any bill that has no real flexibility, it needs to be paid weekly, fortnightly, monthly. I did that by just going through my bank statement and reading, or looking up the individual bills. So here's just some example ones to help you out. So we've got house and car insurance, health insurance, life insurance, rates, power, internet, phone, and I've worked out, since I get paid weekly, I've split all the amounts into weekly. So 60 a week, 15, etc. You can see them all. I've got all those bills I have to pay, and I've smashed them all together and come up with this name called all bills. Some bills fluctuate, like power, higher in winter, lower in summer. So what you want to try and do is always round up. So if your highest power bill that you had in winter was $240, then assume that that's your power bill, even though in summer it might only be $150. That'll just help you constantly be building up a little more money than you actually need, and that's just the best practice to try and get into. Now we have this account called All Bills. We're going to go back over, chuck it in there. Awesome. So now we have all our expenses that we have to pay, and we have our mortgage or rent. So we've covered most of our compulsory expenses. There's two more, and these fluctuate, and I don't put these ones in bills. I treat these separately because they fluctuate a little bit more. The first one is our fuel. We're going to go into our bank statement, and we're going to look at the last 4 weeks of gas purchases. If you made a little $10, $20 fill-ups because you just had to, no worries, still add it up, and then divide that number by 4, and that's the weekly amount you're going to work on. So in my example, I'm saying that all up I spent $400 on fuel for the month. So I divided it by 4, and I'm putting 100 into fuel. Cool. Same with groceries. You want to look at the last 4 weeks and try and figure out what your weekly amount is. If you haven't done it already, I highly recommend doing a click and collect at your local supermarket. It saves you from impulse buys, and it gives you a really good idea of how much you're spending each week. Next up, I treat this as a weekly obligation, totally up to you, but I think savings is super important. I've got just here a little holiday account. I'm going to chuck $10 into this one. I like to have emergency accounts. I have two types. I have one emergency account that's just for when things come up and you just need to be able to use it, and then I have another emergency account that I only use if things go really wrong, like the car breaks down or something happens where I have to get that money out. That one builds up a bit slower. My main emergency, which I make 20, and my second emergency, which I make 10. We have a baby fund. That's just for whenever we need new stuff. Babies always use a lot of things, it seems, so it's good to add that all up. So then I go down and I go to weekly obligations total, and now I can see all the expenses that I have to pay every week, roughly. Now I know on this hypothetical that I have to pay $1,455 out of my $1,800 every single week. So then now I know, because I've done this, how much I have to work with. In our hypothetical, I've got $345. A lot of people, this might be $5, it might be $10. It all depends. Cool. Now, a huge thing with budgeting is that if you're too strict, it's not going to work. It's not going to be true. One thing to always have in your budget is a stuff I forgot to budget for category. Try and do about 5% of your total income, if you can, you put into that, and that's just sort of a floating money that you can use. 10% of 1800s, 180, so $90 we're going to put and forgot to budget for. And then again, you've got to be realistic. If you get takeaways once a week, chuck that in. So I'm going to chuck 40 in here. Maybe you like to go out for a coffee, you go catch up with a friend at a cafe every week, totally fine. Just try and budget for it so you know about it and what's happening. Then we like to have our spending money, so I'll put in KiwiDad, and he gets $50 spending money a week, quite generous. Kiwi Mama, and she gets $100 spending money a week, very generous. But you can add any kind of spending in here. Maybe you've got doggy daycare, maybe you have human daycare. There could be any sort of expenses that fluctuate, and that's totally fine. Chuck that one in here just so you can keep track. Then at the end of the week, you'll see your total expenses here, and you'll know exactly how much you have every week. Now here's the trick, and it's one that I haven't quite mastered myself yet. Try and just do a little check-in and just have a look at what you actually spent. It's really hard to stick to a budget, and that's totally fine. Just try and track what you spent that wasn't in the budget, and then you can plan for that next time. Maybe there was an expense that you totally forgot about until it came up. That's all good. Just track it and add it in. Alright, if you made it this far, well done. You've just completed your very first tutorial on having a budget. Maybe you've done a budget before and this was just a quick rehash. Maybe this is your first time looking at a budget. I hope that it's not as intimidating as it seemed. I hope this video helped you learn how to budget. And if you have any questions, just fire them through to me. Maybe I missed something, maybe I went too quickly. The main thing with a budget is just to start. You might miss a week, it's totally fine. It's just about tracking your spending and learning what kind of spender you are and then trying to mitigate that. So I know, for instance, that I love to get takeaways once a week. That is just something that I know is part of my, financial well-being, is that I like to not have to cook dinner once a week. My wife doesn't want to cook dinner, so we budget 4 takeaways every single week. And now we have control over it. We don't go more than once. We do it 1 time a week, unless there's some sort of dinner with friends or something like that. So it's just about learning your habits, and by recording things in a budget, you're gonna learn a lot about yourself, and you're gonna realize that maybe that online shopping you thought was totally fine, maybe it's taking a little too much of that budget week to week. So try and check in at the end of each week, or even at the end of each month, and see how you went. That's it from me, ka kite anō, and thank you for watching.